Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'll be showing you guys the best way to set up your Spellshot so you can just absolutely breeze through the campaign and also have a super easy time going through the early endgame content, absolutely just destroying everything the entire time. There's so many different combinations of things to use with this build, which makes it super fun to play around with. Of course, I'll do my best to mention everything that I think is important, but there's honestly so much variety in this game that it will be difficult to cover absolutely everything. This build is far from perfect, and it is more so meant to serve you as a foundation to build off of and to use to farm out the perfect gear while starting your endgame journey or while leveling, rather than like a pinnacle, perfectly set up endgame build. This is mainly just meant to be what you start out with and what you're going to be building off of. I'll of course end up posting perfectly optimized endgame build videos for every single character, but I obviously still need to farm way more gear and figure everything out before I post those videos. Either way though, this build is extremely good nonetheless, and you guys are going to love it, and it has made my early endgame progression extremely easy. Alright, let's get into it. I plan to cover skill tree, secondary subclasses that you can use, everything you need to know about weapons, which spells I think you guys should use, which enchants you should use, all that stuff regarding around gear. I'll give as much information as possible, but I don't want to overload you guys with information either, so I'll do my best to keep it succinct, but let's just get into it. So, starting off with the basics of Spellshot, the main thing that is important here is our passive ability, which is Spellweaving. This is basically the building block of our character, and it is what we're going to be taking advantage the most of. So, anytime that you cast a spell or you reload, it is going to grant you a stack of Spellweaving, which is going to increase your spell damage. Spellweaving stacks automatically are going to decay after a few seconds. They actually last quite a while, and it's very easy to upkeep because you can simply just shoot your weapon and reload. And then as you can see on the bottom left of my screen, I have a Spellweaving stack there, and you can just do this perpetually. And then anytime you cast a spell, it's also going to increase your Spellweaving stacks. It also has the extra subtext where whenever you cast a spell that is repeating, meaning it's going to cast multiple times during the channel, it has a stack of also giving, or has a chance of giving an additional stack of Spellweaving. That's not particularly interesting. Each stack of Spellweaving is going to give you 10% extra spell damage. It's going to last 10 seconds, and you're going to get a maximum of 5 stacks by default. We are going to increase the maximum stack chance, and we're also going to be taking a huge advantage of Spellweaving. There's a lot of different things that interact with it, not only giving us extra gun damage, but also increasing the amount of spell damage it's going to give us. And there's so much stuff that is built off of or is going to synergize with these Spellweaving, so this is the most important part of the character. I'm going to go over how I recommend you guys start out with the skill tree, what you want to do for leveling, and then what is ultimately the most important and the best nodes to go into. But first off, let's talk about your secondary class. So I think that there are 3 options that are particularly good. I think 2 are better than the other ones. The first option, which I've been playing with the entire time, is Graveborn. The reason for this is that later on in the end game, you can actually get some really good nodes in the Graveborn skill tree that are going to give you just flat extra damage, which I think is particularly good. But I also liked it for early game because you get the companion, and anytime that you cast a spell, the companion is then going to cast another spell. It does a pretty decent amount of damage. Personally, I'm not sure if this is the best thing for leveling or early on, because the companion isn't particularly interesting, and the first thing that you want to do, regardless of what character you want to do, ideally you want to max out your Spellshot and get this capstone trait before you go into the other trees. So you're really only using your secondary class while leveling, at least like half of the leveling, kind of just for whatever the passive is. The other good passive is Spore Ward, and the Mushroom Companion isn't all that bad, but it actually has some pretty good stuff early on in the skill tree. So once you get around level 25 or whatever, and you reach the capstone for your Spellshot the first time, and you start building into your other class tree, this has some really good stuff early on in the form of extra gun damage and extra gun crit chance. But early or late game, I don't think that this is the better option. And then we have Stabomancer, which is all around really good, and its starting class tree or starting passive skill is really good. It increases your crit chance by a flat 30%, which is really, really good early on because crit chances few and far in between. And this is also one of the best ways to set yourself up for the end game as well. If you're focused on more gun damage stuff, Stabomancer is probably your best bet if you want your guns to do a little bit more damage, and then Graveborn is probably what you want to do if you want to be more spell oriented and having your spells do the bulk of your damage. But either way, you're going to be utilizing both forms of damage, so it's kind of just up to you what you prefer. Stabomancer is probably what I'm going to swap to when I'm done testing everything with Graveborn, because it has a lot of movement speed stuff that increases your damage, which I really like. I've been talking really for a lot and really fast, so I'm going to stop talking with that. But for now, I'm going to be going Graveborn because that's what I'm familiar with and that's what I've been using. But all the other ones that I mentioned are going to be really good. So we'll slot in Graveborn, and we'll talk about different nodes here later. But for now, let's just get into how we're actually going to set this up. So we're going to be using Ambihextrious for this, so that we have pretty much 2 spell casts. Just to clarify, When you have Ambidextrous and you get 2 spellcasts, they are not going to count as ability damage or anything. It is purely based on spells, so nothing that is scaling with abilities is going to interact with this. You basically just get 2 spells, and that's the whole point of it. The reason that we care about spells is because we have so much stuff that is going to stack with our spell damage, and we're going to be using spells for the majority of our damage with this build, which is also going to feed into our gun damage as well, and you can actually shoot guns while casting certain spells, so that's pretty much the main purpose of this. So starting off, you want to go 5 points into spell critical hit chance. This is just going to increase your spell crit by 60%, which by default is extremely good. And then secondary to that, what's probably the most important thing and is one of the main ways that we're able to make Spellshot do so much gun damage is magic bullets. A portion of all of your damage that is an increase to spell damage is also applied to your gun damage. Early on, you're not going to have a lot of increases to spell damage other than the flat Spellweaving, but I'd recommend putting some points into this pretty early on as well. I'm not sure if it's better to put your first 5 into, Spell Sniper or your first 3 into magic bullets. It's kind of hard to tell. I'd probably mix and match or just do what I did here. It's probably not going to be all that significant. The next thing that we want to go into is whenever you gain a stack of Spellweaving, a portion of your ward is restored. This is really good for survivability. It is only 10%, but it's also only going to cost you 1 point, and you're going to be casting spells very frequently. In terms of the other things that you want, early on, you can use Font of Mana to give yourself some spell cooldown rate, but late game, we're going to be using the Capstone trait, which is pretty much going to instantly reset all of our skills. So late game, we don't really care about spell cooldown rate, but early game spell cooldown rate is pretty good because your cooldowns are going to be pretty long, and you're not going to have that trait that's going to instantly reset things. Otherwise, what's really good is that we get this flat reload speed in the form of Prestidigitation. Oh my god. Which increases your reload speed, but it's only 8% per, so it's not a huge amount of reload speed increase. I like to go with Just Warming Up, which is going to give you fire rate per stack of Spellweaving, and ideally we're going to have a ton of Spellweaving stacks, like I'll show you guys in a minute here, and how to get up to 11 stacks, which is what our ideal goal is. So having that extra fire rate is pretty much calculated as just flat extra percent damage, so fire rate is really good, but if you don't like the reload speed of your guns being really slow, going into reload speed is certainly really good too, because you're going to be reloading your guns a lot anyway. And then we're going to be going into Glass Cannon. If you're leveling up and you're having difficulty dying, you don't have to go into this. It is 30% flat extra spell damage, which is really good. But ultimately, if you're having survivability issues, it may not be worth it because it's going to make it to where your shield isn't going to automatically regen. But I'm going to go in this because I'm all about that damage. By the way, I just want to clarify, the way that this works is that your gun damage is basically going to get half of a bonus of whatever spell damage you increase. So, for example, this is a 30% spell damage increase. By doing this, I'm also effectively buffing my gun damage by 15%, basically. It's not 50%, it's 45, so it'd be like 14.4 or some like random number. It's not significant. I just call it 50 just to make it easy. So that's why this is really, really good, and that's why our gun damage is able to scale so far out of control. The rest of these points, I'm just going to go full into fire rate, but again, you can go reload speed. And then we're going to get what is probably the single best thing in this entire tree, other than the capstone, is high thread count, where it's going to increase the maximum amount of spellweaving stacks by 3. This is going to give you an insane amount of extra damage because we are getting those extra spellweaving stacks, which per stack is going to give us an insane amount of spell damage, which I'll show you guys how to maximize later. But you end up getting 50% extra spell damage per stack, and then you're going to be able to get up to, with what I have here, +6 plus the +5 that you have by default, you're going to be able to get up to 11 stacks, so you're going to get 550% extra spell damage, which is then going to turn into roughly 200% extra gun damage, which is really, really good. So you immediately want to put some points into that, and then we'll talk about the relics, but obviously I have a relic that's going to give it 1 extra point. And then for the extra things, you want to go into Imbued Weapon. Whenever you cast a spell, your gun is going to deal bonus damage of that spell's element for a short duration. This is pretty much just flat extra damage, and it's also going to help you if you're using like a lightning spell and then like a fire weapon, then your gun is going to have fire and lightning, which is going to be pretty good. So we're going to put some points into that, but if you're just leveling, I would recommend putting at least 1 point into Warcaster first, because whenever you get a kill, it's going to give you a chance to instantly reload your gun, and just having this at 1 point is pretty good early on, just so you do have that opportunity to get that extra gun reload. And then once we end up getting 1 slot, 1 kill, this is going to increase your gun damage per stack of Spellweaving as well. So not only are you feeding into the extra gun damage in the form of spell damage and then swapping it into gun damage with magic bolts, you're also just getting a flat amount of extra gun damage, and at 11 stacks it's going to be 44%, which is really good. Double Knot, I have not had a chance to fully test or really notice it being all that different. I decided to not put my points into this anymore because I didn't really see it being all that significant, because it seems to only work for like one shot. I don't really know. I could be entirely wrong, and you guys can let me know about that in the comments, but I don't really think that it's worth speccing into. I specced out of it and I didn't notice that big of a difference, and I wanted to have extra skill points options to be able to go into the other tree anyway. So I pretty much just maxed out Imbued Weapon, and then I put the rest of my points into Warcaster because I really like having the chance of it automatically reloading, and 36% is a pretty good chance to go with. Then we're going to get Sever the Thread, which is going to give us our gun crits a 15% chance to instantly reset all of our spell cooldowns. Even if our spell cooldown has like 4 charges, for example, it's going to reset all of those. And if we have 2 spells, it's going to reset all the charges for all of our spells. This is only a 15% chance, so sometimes you're going to get unlucky and it's not going to proc. But ideally, we're going to be using weapons that are going to have really high fire rate, so we're getting that crit over and over and over again. So it's going to pretty much happen near instantly, meaning that we don't care all that much when it comes to spell cooldown rate once we get this capstone. While leveling, I'd recommend putting a lot of points into getting that cooldown rate low, and then once you reach the capstone, just reset your skill tree and then go into the capstone and set it up kind of how I did. But while I was leveling, I just omitted just warming up and I put my points into Font of Mana instead. Now that we are leveled up on the Spellweaving, you could decide to put the rest of your points into Double Knot, and then you could go to reload speed. But what I like to do, especially for endgame, is I like to reach down here to get extra spell damage whenever we get as a kill skill through Graveborn, which is going to give us a total of 60% spell damage when we max it out. So let's talk about how we want to get there. All of these are not particularly great. If you're leveling up, Essence Drain is pretty good for the spell cooldown rate. 50% per as a kill skill, or sorry, 5% as a kill skill. Flat cooldown rate, which is pretty good, and you're going to have that up almost all the time. But I didn't really want to spec into this now because we got the capstone. So the other option is we just get maximum health or dark magic efficiency. Dark magic efficiency isn't really going to do much for us unless we're using a spell that is dark magic, and I don't really care about the health. So I'm just going to go into Faithful Thralls, which is just going to increase our damage because we're always going to have that pet out. So it's a 9% flat damage increase. It's not significant, but it isn't 0 either. And then we can just put 2 points into maximum health, or if you want a little bit of cooldown, even with the capstone, even if maybe you're not critting all that much, you get the cooldown right there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put some points into Sanguine Sacrament. This is the bulk of our survivability. It's pretty much just going to heal us for about 20% of our health at 2 stacks. Whenever we cast a spell, it does have a short little duration, so you can't just like spam your cast, but this is pretty much going to be our main form of survivability, which is really good, especially because we're using glass cannon mage armor, so our survivability isn't that great by default, but when we put this in, it's super helpful. If you're having survivability issues early on, you could very easily put some points into Essence Drain and then try to get some points down here so you have more survivability that way. And then what we're going to do is Dark Pact. The only reason that I'm using this is because I'm increasing my dark magic damage, because one of my spells is dark magic. If you're not using a dark magic spell, this is not particularly great, but what's interesting about this is that we can put some points in there, and then we can get Stain of the Soul, where whenever we deal damage, it's also going to deal bonus dark magic damage. So getting 5 points in that pretty much just increases our spell damage by a flat 20%, because it's just going to do bonus damage on top of the damage that we're already doing. So getting the extra 12% here is increasing this by a little bit, but it's not significant. It's going to make this go up to like 20% or whatever. So you could very easily just put the other slot into the extra health regen, so you have more survivability, or you could go in the form of increasing your companion's damage, but this is not significant either, so it's not all that big of a deal. The main reason that we're doing this is so that we can get Ascension, like I mentioned before, where your maximum health and spell damage is increased for a long duration. Anytime that you get a kill, it's going to last 30 seconds, and at max stacks, you're going to be getting a total of 60% extra spell damage, as well as 60% extra max health, which I think is particularly good. This is going to allow your total spell damage increase to be extremely high, and then we're going to be feeding that into our gun damage, right? So getting all this extra spell damage is really powerful. This is the main reason that I'm doing this, but honestly, there's a lot of different ways to set it up. But this is pretty much the main reason that I went into Graveborn, was for this tree, as well as some other things, and I like having the pet. Something that I see a lot of people doing is, instead of maxing out their Spellshot and getting the capstone trait, they instead decide to go all the way down to Blast Gasp for Graveborn, omitting the capstone, and getting this, which is going to just do a flat amount of extra damage whenever you cast a spell. It has a chance to just do an explosion and do some extra damage. This is really good. I would like to try this with, I'd like to get a relic that has this as well as having the +1 here with high thread count, but I don't know if that's possible to do. But either way, I do want to try this with a relic, but I haven't had the opportunity to get one of those. I don't even know if you can get this trait on a relic. I would imagine that you could, which I think would be really good if you could, so that you can keep the capstone, because the capstone is the main reason that I wanted to play this character, because I like the idea of just like spamming my spells back to back to back. But if you had spells with low cooldowns and you went into cooldown rate instead of having the capstone, then you wouldn't have to rely on your gun getting crits, and then you could go into blast gas for just extra damage. And that's what a lot of people like to do. I'll probably do a Graveborn focus build later, where Graveborn is my main character, and then I'll focus on using blast gas. But recently I've been enjoying playing how I have it set up here, but you could also go Stabomancer with the whole different gun damage setup as well. In terms of what hero stats you want to go, I'd recommend going into crit damage early on, because we're going to have all that built-in extra crit chance on our spells, which is going to roll on them by default, but also in the skill tree. So getting extra crit damage is pretty much just flat extra damage. Next, you could go into crit chance for your weapon, or just to make your spells get closer to that 100% mark. And then status damage is really good overall, just because our spells are going to do a lot of status damage, but this might not be as good universally, because some spells are more oriented on the instantaneous damage rather than the status effect damage, but kind of just depends on the spell that you want. As you can see, my Spellshot power here is 55%. Very cool UI bug that we have right here. This is increased by gear, which I'll talk about later, but this is the single most important thing that you want to go for when it comes to gear. Nothing is as good as getting Spellshot power, because this is going to increase the amount of your Spellweaving stack from 10% spell damage to 55% spell damage, or whatever percent your Spellshot power is, which is just going to drastically increase how powerful you are, because we're getting so many Spellweaving stacks. So this is the main thing that you want to go for when it comes to your gear. Anytime you get jewelry or relics, make sure that it has Spellshot power over anything else. Graveborn power we're also going to be getting, because we have Graveborn, but this is pretty much just going to increase our dark magic stuff. And if you're not using dark magic, this is not going to be great, but ideally you got a relic that has both Spellshot and Graveborn power. Getting into these spells themselves, which is the most important thing of this build, the variation with spells and like how many different ways they can roll, how many different things can make them good, how many different spells there are in total is absolutely crazy. For leveling, the only thing I can recommend is just put on what you get and try it out, and you'll kind of start to see patterns of which ones that are better than others. Personally, I think that the best spell while leveling and for like just AoE clearing is using Sunder. Sunder's really good. It just puts out a wave and just does an insane amount of damage. And you can get something like this Quaking Sunder here, where it has a second burst of energy, sending another shock of damage through the original area, just branching out. But you can also get one that I don't seem to have the roll in my inventory anymore, but there's one that I used while leveling that was extremely good, that would basically chain it to nearby enemies. So you'd hit one guy with it, and then it would just chain around, and it also does a really good amount of damage by default. So I'd highly recommend trying out Sunders. Other things that are really good that served me well while leveling was Ice Spikes. These, especially the repeating pass ones and the ones that snap, they do a whole bunch of damage. But honestly, all the spells are really good in their own right. They just have certain things that are better, or that are going to work particularly well with them. What's really important is just how they roll. Getting spell critical hit damage is probably the most important thing, and that if they have really high spell damage and they have multiple spell charges, it's likely that it's just going to be a good roll. Having low crit chance isn't all that significant, or a low cooldown or a high cooldown isn't that big of a deal, because we're getting a lot of that stuff built in through our skill tree there. The only thing that I would recommend staying away from would be the barrages. These skills I haven't found to be particularly good. They don't track on, they don't seem to have all that high of base damage. I'm sure that there are good ones that exist, I just haven't really gotten all that good of ones, and I've seen, I've had way better luck using things like Sunder and using Arcane Torrents or like Ice Spikes. But honestly, there's a ton of different spells that are really good. I'd recommend just testing everything and you'll kind of figure stuff out. Obviously, the Buffmeister spell, if you haven't seen it already, that is the best one in the game, but that's kind of cheesy because it kind of is broken the way that it functions, and I also don't have that unlocked. I have this thing, but it's not very good. And then I also would recommend Calamity. This is really just fun. You just plop it on and just throws a massive meteor down on the ground, which is a lot of fun to use, but damage is not particularly impressive. But like I said, Sunders are my favorite things to use. Alright, this video's already been really long. Let's talk about weapons and stuff. So I'm going to be pretty brief with this. Weapons, you want SMGs or you want pistol crossbows. These are by far and away the best weapons in the game. The absolute best weapon in the game is getting a Dala, or I think it's Hyperion is the other one. I could be wrong there. Pretty much it's going to be a Nightshade. It's just a cryo weapon that has either ×4 or ×5 under the damage stat there. And that's going to make it to where the gun shoots like this, just on the ground, and it just shoots an insane amount of shots per shot or whatever. So you're just going to be able to crit over and over and over again, pretty much instantly resetting all of your skills. So as you can see here, I'll throw out a random skill and then I'll shoot, and it's just literally just going to instantly reset it. So that's the main reason that we're using this, but it also just does an insane amount of damage. Alternatively, the crossbows are really good because every shot increases the damage of itself, and this honestly just seems tuned really highly. So these are the two things that I'd recommend getting while leveling, but any sort of SMG is going to be really, really good while leveling. In terms of everything else, honestly, a lot of this stuff is going to be really min-maxy. While leveling, I'd recommend just getting some enchants that you see that are pretty good. There's a lot of them that are really good, such as on spellcast, increased damage type of whatever the type of spell that you're using. I really like this Dark Magic Sunder that I'm using, so increasing the Dark Magic on it is really good. And then you can get some other enchants like I have on my Ice Pack, where on a spell cast you increase your damage dealt. One thing to note is that these enchants are not going to stack if you have two of the same one, so if I had enchant on spell cast increased damage dealt, on both of these it would not stack. But if I had on spellcast increased gun damage on this one and then on spellcast increased normal damage, then they would stack. So ideally you want to get a whole bunch of enchants that are going to increase damage dealt. As you can see, I'm double dipping on this because I haven't rerolled this one yet, so this is not actually doing anything. But ideally you want to get a whole bunch of enchants that are going to revolve around your spellcast and just going to increase flat damage, gun damage, or whatever the damage is of your spell. In terms of your shield and stuff, for your shield, you're going to be regenerating passively a lot of that ward whenever you cast spells. The recharge rate is irrelevant because it's not going to recharge anymore with Glass Cannon. I would just go into capacity, and then you can get some things where whenever you kill an enemy, like this one, it's a pretty good roll. Whenever you kill an enemy, you get max health. I just have this for survivability, but there's some other ones where, like, when you drain your ward, you get some extra damage, or when the ward is depleted, you get some extra damage. There's a whole bunch of different ways for this to roll. It's pretty obvious what is good. Obviously, I don't have perfect stuff, and I'm not going to go over what is absolutely perfect because that's not really the purpose of this video. In terms of like your amulet and your rings, you just want flat spell damage, and then whatever is going to either increase gun damage or spell crit. Both of these are fairly good, nothing crazy. For your relic, which is particularly the most important thing, the only thing that matters is that it has Spellshot power and that it is going to give you high thread count. I've been trying to get a better one that has Spellshot and Graveborn and maybe has some flat spell damage or flat spell crit, or maybe even gives me, I believe it is possible to get, let's see, if I could get high thread count plus Ascension on one roll, I think that would be really good. Or if you could get high thread count and somehow Blast Gasp on the same roll, that would be pretty good. But I don't really think that that's possible, but honestly, getting high thread count is the most important thing, and then whatever else is fine. I have the extra rate of fire here, but there's a whole bunch of options, maybe Sanguine Sacrament for the extra survivability, or something like more imbued weapon stacks if that's possible to roll as well. I haven't played enough to know all of the possible rolls, but that's kind of what you'd want to go for. And then for your other stuff, like I mentioned, you could just, on this, you could get Spellshot power and Graveborn power, or you could get extra, just increased flat damage to whatever spell that you like using. That pretty much about covers everything in terms of the myth rank, which you've seen that I've been lazy to spend. I would probably go into, on the top right, in Archmage, I'd probably go into crit damage. On Blade Master, I would go full into dark magic damage if you're using some dark magic stuff. Otherwise, I guess you could get like Constitution or something for the extra survivability there. Deadeye, I'd recommend going full into gun damage, and then you could go like reload speed, max size, whatever. All those are really good. On Druid, I've just been going full loot luck just because that's the only thing that I care about there. But if you're using like a lightning spell like an Arc Torrent, you could go lightning damage. And then that's pretty much going to be it. Sorry for the video being long. I tried to cover absolutely everything. I plan to make, fully comprehensive endgame builds for this character once I get everything set up. But obviously I don't have, perfect gear yet. I've still been farming out chaoses. I didn't have early access to the game, so, I didn't already have everything unlocked and whatever else. I plan to make a whole bunch of videos covering everything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed, please drop a like, subscribe for videos similar to this one. Hopefully I covered everything, and hopefully you guys have a really good time with the character. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Peace.